have such sights.
Such sights to show you.
I'm ranking all 11 Hellraiser films. Hellraiser is without a doubt one of my all-time very, very, very favorite franchises. I am a massive Clive Barker fan. My favorite Clive Barker film adaptation is probably everyone else's as well, which is Nightbreed. I don't know if you can see the poster. Hellraiser. It really did shape and form me as a kid. I don't know if I should be admitting to that right now, but I remember watching it and thinking, this is beautiful. Look at them. They're gorgeous. They're just such beautiful creatures. All of the different Cenobites are just so unique and so clever. I know a lot of people don't like body horror. I find it very compelling. I find beauty in the dark and the weird and probably the disturbed. I just loved the entire idea of the labyrinth. And I fell in love with Pinhead. Even though I know that Clive Barker doesn't like it when you call the Hell Priest Pinhead, I will always call Pinhead, Pinhead. If you didn't know, Pinhead actually started from the crew. That's what they were calling him. And then fans liked it, and it stuck. The name Pinhead was not actually used until Hellraiser 3.
Play with this Pinhead!
Body horror and religious supernatural films are some of my favorite. While Hellraiser isn't necessarily religious, it does kind of have that whole religious type aspect to it. Hence, Pinhead actually being the Hell Priest. You've probably seen most, if not all of these films, if you are a Hellraiser fan, but I won't spoil them if you haven't. I will give quite a bit of information though. If you are unfamiliar with the Hellraiser franchise, the films all center around a puzzle box. When the lament configuration is solved, it opens a portal into the Hell dimension. It's really like the labyrinth. That's what it's called. When the portal opens, out come the magical, the mystical Cenobites. Depending upon what you believe, Cenobites are either humans that were so heavily disturbed from being in the labyrinth that they became these creatures, or, and probably makes more sense as you go along with the films, that the Cenobites are a human of certain desires and a demon of certain desires combined. Like they kind of complement each other, and they have become this thing, which makes more sense because they do have abilities, they do have, you know, different traits and things, and it's kind of a unique way to see it. And I'll explain as we go along in the films why that makes a little bit more sense, especially when you get to the third film. One of the biggest motivations in Hellraiser is desire. Your desire is what makes you either seek this world, this plane, or it doesn't. Most of the time it was really pretty gritty and pretty sexy. But desire is at the core of all these films. And it's very important to me and crucial that desire remains a central part of each of the Hellraiser films, because I feel like that's what gives it its grittiness and honestly almost dirtiness. Like when the Hellraiser films don't have that, they don't feel the same. So you'll know as we go along which films I think don't have that gritty, dirty desire. Also, I will tell you where you can stream these films so you can check them out for yourself if you've missed any of them. I'm going to rank these in chronological order. So as far as my ranking, of course, I had to put a Hellraiser twist on it. So my S tier for Hellraiser films is, well, raises hell. I mean, duh. Like, I feel like that's simple, and I could have tried a little bit harder, but I feel like that makes the most sense, right? Yeah. My second tier is hellish. So, I mean, you know, it's hellish. It's got a little hell in it. It's got a little hell in ya. The third tier is purgatory. Basically, you're stuck in limbo. Maybe not great, but, you know, not horrible. I probably actually found it mildly enjoyable because I find most of the Hellraiser films somewhat enjoyable. So, there's that. My fourth tier is earthly. I mean, do you see where I'm going with this? You're not raising hell. You're not even a little bit hellish. You're not in limbo. You're on Earth, which is kind of poopy. Can you guess what my last and final tier is? Of course, it's heavenly. It's the exact opposite of whatever a Hellraiser film should be. That's my tiers. That's what we have. That's what we're doing. That's what we're working with. First, we're going to start with 1987's Hellraiser, directed by Clive Barker, starring Andrew Robinson, Claire Higgins, and Ashley Lawrence. The first Hellraiser film was written and directed by Clive Barker. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. And it was based on Clive Barker's 1986 novel, The Hellbound Heart. He didn't like previous adaptations of his books, so he decided to do it himself. And quite frankly, he did a superb job. So you see a man named Frank, and he is in a world market somewhere, and he goes to buy this box, the Lament Configuration. He takes it and takes it home and opens it in his attic. I believe it's his attic. It's really kind of hard to tell within the house. It's kind of just a room in the home. And these Cenobites come and they take him. They do some damage and then they just take him away. Next we see Frank's brother Larry and his wife move into the home. Since Frank has disappeared, they assume he's gone, or not necessarily dead, but he's no longer there, so they're going to live in the house. Sure, okay. During the moving process, Larry cuts his hand and spills some blood on the attic floor. When he does this resurrects Frank, the brother. However, Frank is not looking good. He's not looking good at all. He's barely human, basically. Julia finds him, and we discover that Julia and Frank had a little something going on, so she agrees to help him and completely resurrect him. Kirsty is Larry's daughter. She discovers Frank, and Julia steals the puzzle box and runs out of the house. And basically what happens next is the movie. I don't want to give too much away because it's pretty crazy. It's pretty wild. This is a phenomenal Hellraiser film. I will never forget seeing this film and then seeing Pinhead and the Cenobites come out and thinking, what are they? What are they? Wow. I mean, I've always really liked gory films. It's just kind of my thing. You look at some of the stuff and it's like, wow, they did such a great job there. It's so crazy. It's hard work to make really good special effects, and I think that the Hellraiser films are definitely one of the franchises that I admire for its special effects. Hellraiser is without a doubt a classic, and it definitely raises hell. And guess what? Hellraiser is streaming on Tubi. Hellbound, Hellraiser 2. Directed by Tony Randell, starring Ashley Lawrence, Claire Higgins, and Kenneth Cranham. This movie basically picks up right where the first one left off, except that it starts out and we see a British soldier named Elliot Spencer. This gets so exciting for me. This is when I fell in love with Doug Bradley, y'all. I'm like, he's so wonderful. We see this British soldier open the Lament Configuration, and he gets transformed into Pinhead, which is really actually very, very, very cool. Considering the events of the first film, Kirsty has been admitted to a psychiatric hospital, and there are police investigating, what happened at the house and trying to figure everything out. She is working with a psychiatrist, and she is actually telling them the truth about what happened. And of course, no one really believes her, or do they? The police mention that they have found a bloody mattress, and Kirsty begs them to destroy it because she believes that if they don't, that another resurrection could happen. As it turns out, the psychiatrist, the doctor who is treating her, does actually believe Kirsty and is kind of obsessed with the lament configuration and the whole Hellraiser idea. So he takes the mattress for himself, and he convinces a patient to help with the resurrection, as it were. Turns out it's not Frank that resurrects this time, but in fact Julia. Yes, the stepmother from the first film, which is really actually pretty cool, kind of awesome. The doctor, knowing that it's real, of course decides to help Julia because he wants to open this gateway himself, and he, agrees to help her, much like she agreed to help Frank. The doctor's assistant, the psychiatric assistant, kind of has some weird ideas and thinks maybe, something's going on, so he does go to the doctor's house, and he does see, in fact, what has transpired and happened. He runs back to Kirsty, and the two of them go back to the doctor's house, and Julia is fully restored. The doctor is using one of the other patients, a girl who does not speak but loves to solve puzzles, to open the gate for him. It's really cool because it's one of my favorite scenes when she does solve the box. Pinhead comes and tells the other Cenobites to stop and to not take her. I'm probably giving a little too much away on this one. He tells her, no, it's not her that wanted us, someone else. I feel like rules should always be part of a horror film. It's what sets horror films apart from others. I mean, all of them do it, like Scream. There are rules, and rules should be followed. And if they're not followed, it kind of turns me off, honestly. After she opens it, and Pinhead says, no, she's not the one that wants us, it's someone else, the doctor and Julia sneak into the labyrinth. This is where we actually first see the labyrinth, which is basically hell, which is actually very cool. And we see the Leviathan, which is like, the Leviathan, it kind of looks like a diamond shape thing. And actually, it's also a configuration, and this is gonna get confusing, so it doesn't matter. The Leviathan is a geometric figure in the labyrinth. How about that? That works. That's good enough for you. Hellbound Hellraiser 2 has better effects than the first film, which makes sense, bigger budget, more effects. The Cenobites look amazing. I love that the Cenobites, feel more real in this as well, because we discover that they are or were once humans. We do discover that they all have a human element to them. So there is always that, okay? Like I mentioned with the Cenobites earlier. Are they humans that have been, kind of tortured into this, or are they the merging? So that could be debatable. But I like that they have a little showdown, and it's very cool. At the end of this film, I actually cried a little. This is when little Crystal fell in love with Doug Bradley. I'll never forget watching him, and then I cried. I cried for Pinhead. I'm so broken. I don't know what's wrong with me. There are some great lines in this film.
The doctor. Is he?
And the end of this film, in fact, shows you a spinning tower, or a spinning pillar of souls, which sets up the third Hellraiser film. Hellbound Hellraiser 2 is, without a doubt, it absolutely raises hell. It is my number one Hellraiser. It is magical, mystical, and perfect. We have a little bit of a gap here when we jump to the 90s, 1992 in fact, for Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth, directed by Anthony Hickox, starring Terry Farrell, Paula Marshall, and Kevin Bernhardt. After the last confrontation, Pinhead has been essentially split. He has split into his more human side, and he is also just the Cenobite. And so here's where I mentioned that it could be a human merged with a demon. The human side of Pinhead is trapped in like a limbo or like a dreamlike state. And the Cenobite part of Pinhead is trapped in this spinning pillar of souls. The owner of a nightclub buys the pillar, you know, because it's cool, because it is cool. It's really cool looking. It looks crazy. Someone from the nightclub steals the lament configuration from the pillar and they wind up in the hospital. There's a reporter there looking for her next big story, her next big break. Doesn't find anything until he walks into the hospital, and what she sees that transpires before his death is something she's literally never seen before. So she decides to put on her journalistic hat and figure out what has happened here. The owner of the nightclub inadvertently awakens Pinhead, who, you know, wants to be fully resurrected. This is a big theme in the films too. And guess what resurrects him? Blood. In this case, it's kind of souls. It's like feeding the pillar. At the end, toward the merging, you do see a little darkness in the human Elliot. It does make sense to me if it was a human and a demon merge. I kind of like that concept too. I think it's kind of cool. I don't want to give too much away about this, but basically it's what transpires. The statue is super cool. So this one has some really, really cheesy lines.
Ready for your close-up, Joey?
And some of the Cenobites, I don't like. I love that we have Doug out of makeup and Elliot has made a reappearance. You know, it's not my favorite Hellraiser, but I will say this is the first time that the name Pinhead was ever mentioned, so that's very, very cool. It's not a bad Hellraiser. It sets up the next film when you see the box in foundation of a building that looks like the lament configuration. I still liked Hellraiser 3. I wouldn't say it raises hell, but it's definitely hellish. Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth, is on Tubi. 2 years later, in 1996, we have Hellraiser Bloodline, directed by Kevin Yeager, starring Bruce Ramsey, Valentina Vargas, and Doug Bradley. I don't think Kevin Yeager was actually credited in this. I think he used a pseudonym, which, I mean, that's fair. That's good. Because let's be real. Do you know where horror movies go to die? It's space. And guess what? Hellraiser Bloodlines is set in space. It starts out where we have this guy who is part of the Merchant line, which is the original toy maker or box maker who made the box. We find out a lot about that in this one. The origins of the lament configuration. He opens the box in a spaceship and he actually gets in trouble and is kind of like arrested or something, and he's trying to explain the story of what's happened. So while it's set in space, most of the film actually happens in the past to Merchant and his lineage, hence Bloodline. The original toy maker made this box for a dark wizard or a sorcerer. He had no idea, but he just made it to the specifications. He brought it to him. They use it to create this portal to hell. And in that process, the princess, Angelique, was created. Another type of Cenobite. She was basically, essentially resurrected almost to Earth. So instead of actually being more like Hellbound, I feel like she's more Earthbound. And she is bound to the person that summoned her, is what I believe, as long as they don't stand in the way of hell. Basically, because Merchant created this box, like his lineage has been kind of cursed. I feel like something has passed through the bloodline where they feel responsible and want to correct their misdeed, and that's what they're trying to do. His generational lineage is trying to rectify the hell that they have brought to the earth. There's definitely some good lines in here. They have these two twins, Cenobites or whatever. They're like, I am pain. They have a really cool skinless like hellhound, which is neat. Oddly enough, I don't love the look of Pinhead in this one as much. I feel like the grid is pretty red. I kind of like when they have a more monotone look. It just reads scarier for some reason. I don't know why. Hellraiser Bloodline. Not great. I did like that they explained a lot of the story, so that's where it gets most of its credit. Hellraiser Bloodline is in purgatory for me. It was a perfectly acceptable watch, which is shocking for a space film. Hellraiser Bloodline is on Amazon. Moving into 2000, we have Hellraiser Inferno, directed by Scott Derrickson, starring Craig Sheffer, Nicholas Turturro, and James Remar. This film is very different as far as the overall feel and look of the film. It has this very film noir type vibe going on. Craig Sheffer plays a detective, or a police detective, who is super corrupt. You know, it's got that whole detective thing going on. He's figuring out the killer. He's such a corrupt officer that he, uses drugs and participates in some extracurricular activities with the ladies of the night while on duty. So he's super good at his job. He finds the puzzle box at a crime scene, he takes it, and he solves it. He starts, kind of hallucinating, having all these things happen. That tends to happen when you open the box, but maybe the box doesn't let you know immediately that you've opened it. He is solving a string of murders by a serial killer who he keeps hearing the name The Engineer. And so he and his partner are heavily trying to catch this person. I can't give too much of this film away. The story is not quite as deep as the other films. And you know what? There is this really weird and odd kind of cowboy butt-kicking scene. It's kind of weird. But I liked it. Not my favorite Hellraiser, but not my least favorite either. So I would say that Hellraiser Inferno is quite earthly. I like the concept of the film noir, but it didn't quite play off and didn't quite work in the concept of this film. Moving into 2002, we have Hellraiser Hellseeker, directed by Rick Boda, starring Ashley Lawrence, Dean Winters, and William S. Taylor. So, interestingly enough, we see Kirsty return in this film. Yay! She and her husband are in a car accident. He wakes up and has very little memory of what has happened and what has transpired. His wife is gone, missing in the accident, and obviously presumed dead. They actually went off of a bridge into, water, so they assumed that the worst. He wakes up in the hospital and he had a head injury and doesn't remember anything. He's having really bad headaches and he's having hallucinations, of course. God, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Through some home videos that you see him watch, you see that it does seem like he and Kirsty did seem happy, but as it goes along, you wonder, is everything really as it seems? Everything starts to unravel and he becomes the prime suspect in some murders. He has all of these different women, practically it feels like coming out of nowhere, hating on him, which is odd and unusual. I do like the way the film ends up. I think that was kind of fun. And I liked seeing Kirsty again. It's definitely not my favorite Hellraiser, but it's not my least favorite either, for sure. Hellraiser Hellseeker is earthly. Now we move into 2005 with Hellraiser Dead, also directed by Rick Boda, starring Doug Bradley, Carrie Werher, and Paul Reese. A reporter is sent to Bucharest to investigate a videotape of a cult called the Deaders, who have filmed themselves doing this ritual and then reanimating someone from the dead, which is actually really crazy. So the reporter tracks down the address of the videotape and she finds a corpse, but she also finds the lament configuration. What does everyone do when they find the puzzle box? They open it, of course, and she does. And then she decides to track down the leader of the cult and figure out what happened in the video. Oddly enough, Winter, who is the leader of the cult, is actually a descendant of Merchant. And he can't open the box for himself, or basically the gist of it is that he gets other people to do it. Because he believes that as the descendant that he should reign in hell or something, is what I'm assuming. It's wild. I don't really understand it all. But yes, he basically thinks he should rule. The reporter sees Pinhead and says, whoa, and Pinhead says, hey, can you help me out here? There's this dude who, I don't like him. He keeps trying to hone his way into my territory. Oh, I'm giving too much away. I'll stop there. This film is not as crazy and convoluted as some of the others. It's well shot. It's interesting. I don't love the cult aspect. I don't love the merchant connection. There's not enough Cenobites in this for me. It's far too reliant on people. So for me, Hellraiser Deader is very earthly. Hellraiser Deader is on Amazon. Moving into 2005, we have Hellraiser Hellworld, the last installment, directed by Rick Boda. Starring Lance Henriksen, Catherine Winnick, and Christopher Jacot. This is, in fact, sadly, the last movie in which we see Doug Bradley as Pinhead. So that's a little sad, a little disappointing. A group of college kids play this online game called Hellworld. It's basically a game that is about the Cenobites and Hellraiser, essentially. It's online. One of the friends becomes so obsessed with the game that he does some things to himself that he shouldn't. We see all the friends at the funeral saying, oh, maybe there was something we could have done, but, of course, it's not really their fault. Several years later, they get an invitation from playing the online game to a very exclusive Hellworld party thrown at a mansion. And, of course, they all go. The mansion was a former convent and asylum. It's kind of a creepy place, but it's very cool. It's got a lot of taxidermy and formaldehyde, wet specimens and stuff, so, I kind of dig that. They also received cell phones so that they communicate with other guests at the party. They take a drink from the host, and it's basically what transpires from there. The owner of the mansion is Lance Henriksen, so he's actually very cool in the film, and he actually is in it quite a bit. He does a great job. This one also has Henry Cavill. It feels very different from the other film. Pinhead is kind of crazy in here because he gets a little handsy with a meat cleaver, which I kind of like seeing him so rough. The end is interesting. It does have a twist, and it wasn't what I expected. Not the best. My biggest issue with this film is how it does not feel like a Hellraiser film, and that is a problem for me. If it hadn't been a Hellraiser film, it would have received much better reviews. Unfortunately for Doug Bradley's last appearance as Pinhead, it is far too earthly for my taste. Hellraiser Hellworld is on Amazon. We have several years between the last film and 2011's Hellraiser Revelations. Directed by Victor Garcia, starring Stephen Brand, Nick Eversman, and Tracy Faraway. Okay, I should preface this by saying that this film was made just, I believe, to hold on to the franchise name. So I feel like it was very hastily thrown together. You have two friends who run away to Mexico to party, essentially. They have run away and the family is totally confused and don't know what has happened to them. The parents receive the teenagers' belongings, and they find a videotape where some of what has transpired is on the tape, and it's very confusing. A year later, the families get together, and one of the sisters finally watches the tape, and she becomes obsessed with the box because they do have the box in their possession. And guess what? It prompts the return of her brother. Yep, crazy, right? You see lots of flashbacks revealing, what has happened. You have a different Pinhead. He's not great, but he's not bad, ultimately. He's no Doug Bradley. What's crazy about this film is he's not what I dislike about this film. But they also make a almost second Pinhead, which I call Pinhead Light, even though it's actually a little creepier because it's missing some skin. And I don't know what the purpose of that is. Perhaps it's just something they wanted to try out, and maybe they felt like trying to be an exact copy of Pinhead was never going to work because Doug Bradley, is Doug Bradley. He's made that character his, ultimately. The story is the acting is not great. Oddly enough, this film is shot much brighter than some of the other films, definitely to its detriment. One of the things about Hellraiser films is how dark and gritty and dirty they are, and this does not have any of that for me. That's kind of a problem. I'm just gonna let you know this is definitely the worst Hellraiser film. Definitely this movie is super duper heavenly. Hellraiser Revelations is on Tubi. We move into 2018 with Hellraiser Judgment, directed by Gary J. Tunnicliffe, starring Damon Carney, Randy Wayne, and Alexandra Harris. I had the opportunity to go to a friend's house where he was having a party, and he had Paul T. Taylor, who is the man who plays Pinhead there, and he screened this film. So that was actually kind of cool. He's definitely a far better Pinhead than the previous Pinhead. This is a very interesting Hellraiser. The whole film really centers around an abandoned home, what basically feels like a portal almost. If you go there seeking, you enter and you are judged based on your deeds and your actions. It's kind of interesting, right? It gives more of a feel of hell. Are you good? Are you bad? Are you gonna go to hell? 3 detectives are investigating a serial killer known as the Preceptor. The Preceptor's murders are based on the 10 Commandments. A connection with one of the victims leads to a dude who disappeared near the house, and one of the detectives goes to the house. As it turns out, he finds himself in the hot seat where he himself is being judged. I do like that it still feels dirty and gritty. It has that feel, but it doesn't have that same desire that I yearn for in a Hellraiser film. I do find it interesting that we do learn that there is, in fact, a heaven and there are angels. I don't dislike that. I mean, if you have a hell, then it makes sense to have a heaven. I just don't know if heaven should actually be represented. It's such a difficult thing to pull off, and it can come off very cheesy. This did okay. Not my favorite Hellraiser. Definitely not the worst. So Hellraiser Judgment would be in purgatory for me. And also, Hellraiser Judgment is on Tubi. Our last and final Hellraiser film is 2002's Hellraiser, directed by David Bruckner, starring Odessa Azion, Jamie Clayton, and Adam Faison. This is a reboot of the Hellraiser franchise, and it does have a different take on the puzzle box and how the puzzle box is used. During a party at a millionaire's home, a dude is presented with a box and he solves it, and this blade comes out and hits him, and then the Cenobites come and take him away. The millionaire is there, and he obviously knew what was gonna go down. We see a drug addict named Riley who is living with her brother. She has a boyfriend who is also a recovering addict. Her boyfriend convinces her to break into a warehouse with him where they discover the puzzle box, and they take it. She solves the puzzle box, but she avoids being cut by the blade. The Cenobites come to her and tell her, well, if not you, someone else. Basically, someone else needs to be cut by the blade, and if they're cut by the blade, then they have been marked, essentially, and that's who they take. The box is going to go through multiple configurations. After each one is solved, a blade comes out, and whoever is cut by the blade is the one that gets taken. It's not about desire, which that is my biggest issue with this film. I don't like the take on this at all. I actually really liked Jamie Clayton as the Hell Priest. I think they are wonderful. I didn't have a single problem with them. I feel like these Cenobites, I feel like they tried too hard on them. They added a little bit too much color, and I feel like the actors emoted far too much. Some emotion, you want the slightest little bit, but when you go too far, it just doesn't work. There's a lot to the story and how it turns out, but essentially the lore is quite different. It's definitely not as dark, not as gritty. It's got some gore, definitely not as gory. The movie is shot really well, and the acting, I think, is great overall. And I like the new Hell Priest. I think it was a decent try, actually, at this. Probably appeal to more of the masses. I would say the Hellraiser reboot is in purgatory. Yeah, I know. Probably better than you thought I would rate it, but I didn't hate it. I just definitely didn't love it. Hellraiser 2022 is on Hulu. Have you seen all of the 11 Hellraiser films? What is your favorite Hellraiser film? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, I really do hope that you have the most amazing day, my spooky darlings. I want to thank you to my Patreon members. You are so wonderful. And I want to mention my newest Patreon member, Jose Reyes, along with Jimmy Horror, Janie McLaren, Jim Kemmerling, and Deal Demon. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, for being part of my little spooky darlings, and I really appreciate you, and thank you so very, very much, because it makes me really feel like y'all are listening and that, you know, you want to see more. Love you. Loving you. La 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 la. La 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 la. Ooh. I should never sing, especially when I have a head cold. This is the one with the camera dude, and then there's like a DVD or CD dude, like where he's like, well, I can't say it's cubed because it's not always cubed. Ooh, macabre. 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 Anyway, why am I so distracted? 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay.